Everyone give it up for James White.
Whoa. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Excellent. I'm going to stand out here, not because I'm being confrontational, but because I've got like really white slides and I don't want to get the like white head thing, so that's why. Before I start, can I just make sure everyone has noted this excellent joke that I put into my talk description? All right, everyone's seen that? Good. All right, let's begin. Apple really cares about accessibility. They do. There's a lot of things that are said about Apple and that, frankly, they say about themselves, and you can debate some of those things, but in my opinion, this is one thing that they have a really good track record on. They talk about it a lot, and they provide a lot of tools for us to use. So way back in iOS, I think it was 7, wasn't it? We got dynamic type. So dynamic type is a way for the user to indicate to the system that they need large text, and for the system and for your apps, for third-party apps, to honor that decision. Now, one thing that we haven't spoken about a lot, because I guess it was a little bit awkward and perhaps talking about this made it maybe seem like we didn't care enough about accessibility, is that it is sometimes quite hard to marry together these settings with the kind of pixel-perfect UI that users have come to expect in iOS apps, and that you have probably come to expect is quite easy to achieve in an iOS app. So still, you get apps that maybe look like this. This is actually Tweetbot, and it's Tweetbot today. Now, please don't screenshot this, or I'm not trying to like shame. And can I just say, it's good. I mean, like this isn't good, but it's good that apps support dynamic type, because if I'm someone who needs large text, I'm sure I would rather that an app looked a little bit broken, hopefully not this broken, rather than an app that looks beautiful and glorious and amazing, but I just can't read it, all right? So it's good, we should be supporting this. Now, fortunately, Apple also cares about aesthetics, of course. And so they have, over the years since then, they have given us more and more tools to help us finesse this stuff, to help us achieve lovely UI, no matter what the user's accessibility settings. So here are some examples from iOS 12. I think I captured these in. So you can see they're doing a lot better there with cell sizes, and we learned today how to make sure that our cells are adapting nicely so that text doesn't overflow them. But one of the things that hasn't really gotten any easier is how to adapt not just your text, but also your icons. Because if you are trying to achieve really, really nice UI, then the balance between your iconography and your typography actually matters. It makes a difference. Not just size, obviously size is an issue here, but lots of other things too, like spacing and things like baseline alignment. Now, I haven't got time to go into the details of some of these things, but if you are interested, I spoke about some of them in my previous session, Design 101 for Programmers, from DevWorld 2016. So you can check out that on YouTube at your leisure. Anyway, so along comes 2019, and at what's the other one called? WWDC. Along comes iOS 13, and every year at WWDC there are some themes that seem to run through the conference, and obviously one of them this year was sort of cross-platform development through things like Catalyst and SwiftUI. But I thought, as I was sort of watching some of these sessions, I thought I detected another theme, and in fact I tweeted about it at the time. So sorry, what the... that's better. I said this, over the last few years, Apple gave us ways to make apps more accessible with things like dynamic type, but at the expense of beautiful UI. Now this year, it seems like they're giving us tools to make beautiful UI no matter what the user's accessibility settings, and this is pretty cool. I noticed this across a few sessions. There were lots of things that made me think this way, but of course, in particular, the thing that really prompted me to think this was SF symbols. Now, just a little aside here, the keynote anvil drop animation really doesn't work great on a light background, right? So if you look at that, that's not great, is it? You really need a dark background to get the full. So if you're speaking to, there's a little tip there from an old hand. So SF symbols, what are these things? Well, they are many things. And the first thing that they are is they are a library of icons that you can use in your app to I guess, closely match what the system is using or will be using from iOS 13 onwards. And also to be consistent with other apps that have implemented these icons. Now, when these were first announced, I didn't know what to think, or I kind of didn't know what to think, and I think I turned to the person next to me and said, "Oh, great, font awesome for iOS apps." All right, you know font awesome, right? It's that awesome way of getting icons into your website or your web app. And look, it's fine. They are not ugly, they're not terrible, but I guess I tend to think of them as icons for people who hate icons. Or that's not icons for people who don't want to worry too much about their icons. Because of course, you know, once you have adopted this, you know, you are at the mercy of whatever the closest icon that can be found to match what you wanted. So I tend to find as a designer, if I'm working on an app, say a website or something, and I deliver mock-ups and the developer builds it, and I look at it and go, "Oh, look, it's looking really good, but that icon's not right." And they say, "Oh, look, you know, it was the closest thing I could find in font awesome." And it's like, well, it's not really close. You see, that's rounded instead of square, and it doesn't match these other ones, and you know, you just don't have control. But fortunately, I was pleased to discover once I went to the session and learnt more about SF symbols is that they are actually really customizable. You can make your own ones and mix and match with your own icons and the system icons. You could even entirely use your own icon set and just use SF symbols for its build system. Which brings me to the other advantage of SF symbols, or the other reason that they are here, is that they make it a lot easier to marry together your typography and your iconography so that they both honor the user's type settings and accessibility settings equally. So they give you a way to go from something that might look like this currently to something that might look a bit more like this. So you can see a few things here. You can see that we have a better size relationship. We have a better stroke weight relationship. We have a better spacing relationship. And also one thing you might not immediately notice is that you can achieve a better baseline alignment. All right. So, you know, a label has a baseline, and it's not actually the bottom of the label, right? And it's also not the bottom of like the lowest pixel of text in the label, because of course, you know, text has ascenders and descenders, right? Now, currently, you can already align to the baseline of a label using auto layout, but what's new is that SF symbols now, they have baseline information embedded in the icons. All right, so now you can align the baseline of an icon to the baseline of the text. And again, the baseline of the icon might not necessarily be the bottom pixel of the actual icon. Like text, some icons, you know, you have visual, optical alignment, and sometimes the bottom might be somewhere that's slightly different. So that's really nice. So, as I said, these things are really customizable, which is good. So obviously, when I first downloaded the SF Symbols Mac app and started to play with these, I did what probably all of you who've tried this did. You did a search for the most obvious thing and discovered it wasn't there. There's been some kind of oversight, but never mind. You know, we are still in beta, so there's still time. Don't worry, I have filed a radar on that one. Oh well, no problem. That gives me a chance to fill in this omission by creating my own. So how does that work? You start with the SF Symbols Mac app, and you export a custom symbol template. And you can export, I was going to say any of them, but it's not actually. There's some you can't export, but I'll talk about that later. Really, any of them. You just need it for the layers and the guides and things. I guess if you were making an icon that had a circle, you'd probably start with one of these circle ones so you can make it the same size. So you export it, and what you get a SVG template, and you can open that in any SVG editor that you prefer, and it looks like this. Sorry, that's the wrong slide. Sorry, it looks like this. So you have three size classes. They are, I think, small, medium, and large, and you have 9 weights. I think the lowest one is ultra light, and the largest one is, or the fattest one is black, I think. And they're all in layers. So you simply get your art, you finesse it to whatever extent you want to finesse it, and you put it into the slots, being sure to make sure they go into the right layers, that you don't change the layer names. Also, in my experience, be careful with the way you group your Bezier paths and things within the icon. So obviously, if I was to uncurl some of these, you would see that the anvil is made of different bits. And for some reason, if you group them, sometimes the grouping is fine. Other times when you group things, the icon just comes out invisible. I haven't really worked out what the rules are. Probably the safest thing I would say is just don't group your stuff at all inside the layers. Now, if this looks a bit fiddly, it is. It's a pain, honestly. Obviously, you're going to be, or your designer is going to be creating more variations of your icon than they have considered before, and then keeping everything in the right layer is a bit of a nightmare. You don't have to. You don't have to do all of these if you don't want to. You can just, for instance, you could do one size and all of the weights. That will work fine. Or you could do one weight, but all three of the sizes. That's totally valid. If you really wanted to, you could just do this one. That's the minimum requirement. I don't know why you would do that, but it will work if you want to. So once you've completed your icon set, you drag it into your asset catalog, just like you are familiar with PNGs. And there you have it. Then you can reference that from your storyboard like this. You can see that you have access to the system ones just there, all named. I don't know why those particular ones came up from my Anvil search, but they did. You just select them like so, and you can configure them like this. You can see that we have adjust image size checked as you would with text, and you can configure it. So you can either specify the scale and weight that you want for that particular place that you're using it, or you can leave it unspecified and let the system choose. And then you can choose the font, and you do that the same as you do a label, like body, heading, and so on. And so obviously if you are trying to marry things together, you make them the same. You run your app, and just like that, you have got support for dynamic sizes. So regular or middle, teeny tiny, and very large. So that's really cool. One other thing that you might notice here, which I think is really nice, is that the chevrons, the disclosure indicators, they are big as well. Because frankly, if someone needs text that's this size, they can't see those, right? So I think that's a lot nicer. Of course, you can use these in code in pretty much the way that you would imagine that this would work, like this. So, obviously lots of interesting things, good things about that, but I want to come back to the question, should you actually use these things? You will notice that I put a question mark onto my talk, right? Icons for everyone. Should you use them? Now obviously, let's talk about some pros and cons. Now obviously there's a lot of pros. I've spoken about some of them, and there are more. I don't have time to sort of go into great detail, but lots of advantages. But let's talk about a con. Let's talk about a disadvantage of this approach. One disadvantage is that they are not very good. Sorry, they're kind of not. Look, and listen, don't take my word for it. You guys know Mark Edwards? Yeah, you follow him on Twitter, you will have heard him talking about this. Seriously, he's an old friend of DevWorld's, and look, if there is stuff about images, about graphics, about screen resolution, and optimizing for these things that he doesn't know, it's not worth knowing. He knows this stuff. And this is his reaction after they were first released. So you're probably looking at that going, well, what's the story? What's the problem? They look all right, don't they? Let's zoom in. Okay, so you can see two issues here. One is clipping, right? So you can see that the dart is clipped on all three of its vertices. And honestly, I can't get my custom SF symbol icons to not clip. And I've played around with them, and I swear that they are within the bounds of some of their system ones, and they clip. But probably the more serious issue is the other issue. They're blurry. Now, obviously, the whole thing is a bit blurry there, but let's look at another example that Mark shared, and let's play this GIF that he shared there. So obviously, what's going on here? So obviously, we've got anti-aliasing, right? And that is totally understandable on something like the magnifying glass, right? You would expect that to make a nice circle. That's totally expected. But you shouldn't have it on the straight lines. Right? You should not have anti-aliasing on the vertical and the horizontal line of the cross, or the straight parts of those. That's not good. So this is about pixel alignment. Now, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, sure, it's in the beta, they'll fix this, they'll get it right. And to their credit, I think in the later betas, the clipping has kind of gotten better. A lot of the ones that were previously clipped are no longer clipped, so that's good. But the other issue, it's not going away. So Mark says, and I can't help but agree, it's pretty much inherent in the technique because, of course, once you start expressing icons in point size like you do for text rather than in absolute sizes, you can't guarantee where the pixels are going to land, right? They're going to land where they're going to land. So, you know, I mean, Apple does some amazing things, and I'm not going to say there's no way they could possibly pull off pixel alignment with this approach, but I can't see it. And I believe actually that someone was telling me the other day that someone from Apple who's involved with this reached out to Mark or replied to Mark, and their response was pretty much to say, here are the great things about SF symbols. So pretty much the gist is like, here are all of the advantages and this is the trade-off. Like they chose these advantages and some of the other advantages I haven't talked about over this. So it was a decision. So if you don't want to get onto the train to San Fran symbols, what are your options? Actually, I've always thought it was a missed opportunity. They shouldn't have called it San Francisco. They should have called it Francisco Sans, right? I've always, like, what were they thinking? So if you don't want to use these, what are your options? And when I proposed this talk, I imagined myself doing a great big deep dive into a state of the nation and going into, and then I realized that 20 minutes is actually a really short talk, so this will be a shallow dive. Of course, you can still use PNGs. They still work. They are just fine. And great advantage of them is that you can finesse them as much as you want. All 3 resolutions, eventually 4, eventually 5. You know, you can pixel align them as much as you like or as much as your designer is willing to. One thing I might point out here, what's going on here? Anvil and anvil. That's not possible. How can you have 2 assets both called the same thing? It works. And this is really cool, actually, because obviously SF symbols only works for iOS 13, but because you can actually have this, an SF symbol and a PNG set together with the same name, then you can actually start using these now, and iOS 13 devices will use the symbol, and iOS 12 and below will fall back to the PNGs, and you reference them using the same API, UI image named, and it just works. So that's kind of cool. So advantages, like I said, you can pixel align them. Disadvantages, they're a pain. Right, you're dealing with a lot of files, a lot of round tripping, particularly if your app is kind of dynamic. If you have, say, targets in your app that color the icons in different colors, then you just end up with lots of little files, and they're just annoying. And also, of course, next week or whenever it is, Apple releases new iPhone 12 Max Pro, whatever it is. Let's say it's got a 4X screen, suddenly we're all clambering to add 4X graphics and support that, so it's annoying. So what other options have we got? Of course, SVG, perfect. You can just get your SVGs and drag them straight into... No, you can't. You can't do that. Sorry, I was thinking about Android, sorry. Come on, Apple, it is 2019. I understand that there are some third-party frameworks to get SVGs going in your iOS app. I haven't tried them, but I guess it just depends on your attitude to dependencies. And also, I think someone found out that there is some new SVG stuff that underlies SF symbols, so maybe we'll get some access to that. PDFs. You can use PDF assets in your app. What's that little info icon? What does that mean? This symbol may not be modified and may only be used to refer to Apple books. Oops. This is another disadvantage of SF symbols. There are restrictions on how you can use them. Now, fortunately, I believe in the later betas, some of those restrictions have come out. I think Apple has realized this is kind of a little bit weird and a little bit hard to enforce. And in particular, I think, so books, phone, and email, which were previously restricted, are no longer restricted. Maybe they realized, like, who's outputting to Apple Books in their app. PDFs. So you drag them in exactly as you do a PNG asset. They're not actually used in vector. They are rasterized. Does anyone use PDF assets? More people than I expected, actually. I never have. Like, what's the deal? They work. I read that they kind of render a little bit weirdly. Is that fair? Okay, so they've improved. The main thing for me was that when they arrived in iOS, I had already found my solution to these problems, which was paint code. Who uses paint code? Fewer people than PDF. Look, anyone who knows me knows I absolutely love this app. So paint code is a way of taking vector graphics and turning it into core graphics code. In Swift, in Objective-C, in Java, in JavaScript. It's super versatile. And once you start using paint code, you don't have to worry when Apple releases the next great 4X screen. It just works, right? You just get crisp graphics. You don't need to update it. It's really nice. Lots of other advantages. You can make your assets dynamic, so you can put frames around them. And you can specify springs and struts to how these things will grow. You can have multiple frames and have bits of it moving independently of others. Now, of course, if you do that, you risk losing that pixel accuracy, pixel alignment. But in my experience, actually, paint code tries to save you from yourself in that. So if you draw a frame around your art and then you resize it, you will see that when it gets to half pixels, it jumps to one or other side. Now, of course, that becomes a trade-off because you lose a little bit of accuracy, because obviously if paint code is deciding I'm going to like shift half a pixel, then you might end up with something that's not quite square or not quite circle. So I guess you have to trade off dynamism with pixel accuracy no matter what you're using. But it is very useful and very versatile. You can do more dynamic things. You can make your color dynamic, so you can handle that issue of, I've got different targets that use different colors, and just updating it is a breeze. The client says, I want a slightly different shade of purple. You come into paint code, you change the purple, it updates all of your icons across the thing. You hit Command R, run your app, and everything has changed. It's amazing. You can actually do super dynamic stuff in paint code, as I demonstrated in this very room some number of years ago. Look at that. Amazing. Yeah, that is paint code. If you would like to check out that animation again or more about paint code, you can check out my session, Paint All the Code from DevWorld 2015. So, what's the bottom line? What are we to do? Should we use SF symbols? Should we avoid them like the plague? I think what I would say is, if you think that your app has modest icon needs that will be served by the system icons, and in particular, I guess if you or your designer don't currently spend too much time worrying about precise pixel alignment, which, let's face it, a lot of people don't, then I guess you've got nothing to lose by adopting SF symbols, and a lot to gain. But if you are someone who tries, to really finesse the details on these things, honestly, I would say you're probably better to stick for now with your current systems. And maybe if SF symbols has limited uptake early on, it might prompt Apple to somehow pull a magic rabbit out of their hat and find some way to avoid the blurriness or the lack of pixel alignment with this approach, or to consider other ways of solving the same problems in different ways. For instance, maybe exposing some of their SVG stuff to us. So that's it. I'm sorry to... nothing like a bit of controversy to end the first day, all right? But anyway, thanks for sticking around.